Imagine standing beneath the stark, clinical glow of an advanced pediatric intensive care unit in the absolute center of Manhattan, New York, systematically reviewing the real-time biometric telemetry logs of a critically ill, orphaned 7-year-old boy, only to discover that his unallocated medical charts have been intentionally falsified by your own hospital's managing board to cover up a multi-million-dollar corporate insurance embezzlement scheme. It does not open with an emotional, chaotic breakdown in the administrative corridors or a frantic confrontation with the security details. It begins with the absolute cold, mechanical stillness of an unmapped data discrepancy on an encrypted database, and the freezing, terrifying clarity that settles into your spine when you realize that the institutional monsters who are exploiting this helpless child are the exact same corporate executives who accelerated the medical neglect of your own biological daughter exactly 12 months ago. I didn't lose my operational balance, I didn't shed a single tear onto the sterile lab sheets, and I didn't alert the compliance directors that their entire operational perimeter had been completely compromised. I simply waited with an unyielding clinical precision for weeks, utilizing my master administrative access tokens to pull every hidden financial transaction, falsified lab report, and corrupt pharmaceutical log from the central mainframes. And then I engineered a devastating, flawless public liquidation. I didn't just file a standard human resources complaint. I coordinated a high-stakes, unannounced forensic raid directly during the hospital's annual multi-million-dollar charity gala, presenting the complete configuration profile of their systemic fraud to the federal prosecutors right in front of their primary global investors. Let me show you how a precise, detail-oriented pediatrician can turn an institutional gaslighting campaign into an immediate, total destruction of a corporate empire without ever altering her posture or raising her pitch. My name is Dr. Clara Vance. I am 34 years old. If you saw me managing the high-density emergency pediatric units, optimizing neonatal compliance protocols, and adjusting advanced life support systems behind the dual monitors at the most prestigious private medical center in Manhattan, New York, you would see a highly precise, completely methodical woman. I have long, cascading chestnut brown hair styled in clean, professional layers that rest elegantly against my white clinical lab coat, piercing, icy blue eyes that have spent a decade analyzing microstructural cellular deviations on diagnostic screens, and a life measured entirely by the unyielding laws of biochemical data, physiological verification, and strict institutional documentation. I did not inhabit a disorganized universe where critical metrics happened by accident or emotional impulse. My environment was an expansive, contemporary, minimalist apartment located in the high-end sector of the Upper East Side, a space built on years of absolute, simple devotion and an unyielding professional routine. I managed my clinical files, monitored our domestic financial assets, and organized my research data with the exact same mathematical precision a senior risk consultant uses to protect high-worth corporate portfolios from internal theft. I believed that this transparent, intensely disciplined routine was an absolute shield against the unpredictable tragedies of the world, completely unaware that the corporate system I served was actively constructing a cold-blooded network of deception right in front of my face. To our professional peers and the elite medical community of New York City, my life was considered the absolute benchmark of an unshakable, deeply aligned operational matrix. But exactly 12 months ago, my entire internal architecture was violently disrupted. My beautiful 7-year-old daughter, Lily, succumbed to an aggressive, progressive, automated autoimmune failure that defied standard therapeutic boundaries. For 90 days, I sat at her sterile bedside, watching her vital metrics systematically drop to a permanent zero baseline, while the hospital's senior executive board continuously denied my applications for experimental high-capacity cellular therapy lines, claiming the compliance regulations prohibited the allocation of the drug. I accepted their clinical explanations with a devastating silent grief, entirely unaware that the corporate director who signed those restriction forms was actively manipulating the data to preserve a multi-million-dollar private pharmaceutical allocation contract. The vacuum of my grief turned my existence into a clinical routine entirely detached from emotional static. I returned to my shifts at the Manhattan Medical Center, working grueling 80-hour double blocks, managing the health outcomes of hundreds of children while completely isolating my own mind behind a wall of cold analytical observation. I refused to take administrative leave. I blocked communication attempts from the hospital's grief counseling staff, and I allowed my social footprint to drop to an absolute zero baseline. The work was my single remaining anchor, a systematic processing of diagnostic data that kept my hand steady and my mind clear of agonizing memories. The primary structural deviation in this frozen baseline initialized on a rainy Friday evening during my midnight rounds in the long-term pediatric ward. I was processing routine physical checkups and updating treatment logs when my attention was directed toward bed 14, an isolated isolation chamber housing a 7-year-old boy named Leo. Leah was an orphan, a ward of the state, whose biological family had vanished from the regional records after a severe transit accident outside the city center. He was suffering from a critical, advanced respiratory failure that required continuous mechanical ventilation and high-frequency monitoring matrix tracking. As I stepped into his quiet room, the ambient hum of the life support machines filling the space, my icy blue eyes stopped on his physical telemetry monitor. I noticed a subtle, distinct physiological mismatch between his actual physical chest movements and the automated readouts displaying on the central nursing station dashboard. The dashboard showed that Leah was receiving a premium experimental genetic therapy compound valued at $40,000 per dose, a drug designed to rapidly repair lung tissue parameters. But when I checked the physical intravenous lines attached to his small arm, my eyes verified a completely different metric. The line was transmitting a standard, low-cost saline baseline solution. The data on the screen was a complete fabrication. I walked immediately to the central ward workstation, utilized my master clinical security credentials, and executed a deep memory dump of Leo's unallocated electronic health records. Within 10 minutes, my monitor rendered a massive, catastrophic system error. The system showed that across the last 6 months, the hospital's senior executive director, Julian Vance, who also happened to be my estranged husband, had systematically processed 24 distinct billing allocations for the experimental genetic drug under Leo's government-funded state insurance profile. The total capital drawn from the state treasury exceeded $1 million. Yet, according to the internal pharmacy inventory logs that I unearthed behind the secondary firewall, not a single dose of the drug had ever left the secure vault for bed 14. The realization hit my chest with a freezing, absolute clarity. Leo was not being treated. He was being utilized as a phantom patient profile designed to siphon massive federal healthcare funds directly into a hidden private equity account managed by Julian and the corrupt members of the hospital's executive board. And then, the final piece of the data puzzle fell into alignment, shattering my remaining trust into absolute dust. The specific genetic drug that Julian was fraudulently billing under Leo's name was the exact experimental compound that I had frantically requested from my daughter Lily 12 months ago. The exact therapy Julian had blocked, claiming it was unavailable due to compliance constraints. He had deliberately sacrificed our own daughter's survival to ensure his fraudulent allocation pool remains undetected by federal tax auditors. A life spent managing critical pediatric emergencies teaches you that the exact millisecond a catastrophic structural failure is identified, any display of chaotic panic, emotional screaming, or immediate confrontation will give the perpetrator the opportunity to purge the database, corrupt the log files, and alter their financial path. My pulse remained perfectly flat, carrying the cold finality of a surgical monitor. I didn't drop my tablet, I didn't alert the ward staff, and I didn't confront Julian in his high-end executive suite on the top floor of the tower. I simply stood in the shadow of the workstation, my mind transitioning into the most ruthless forensic audit I had ever executed in my career. I returned to my Upper East Side apartment that night, sat behind my private encrypted network link, and initialized a comprehensive deep dive protocol into Julian's financial network. Over the subsequent 3 weeks, I bypassed his personal firewalls by utilizing our shared domestic database tokens, credentials he had foolishly left integrated into our household financial server. I mapped out a terrifying, hidden empire of corporate corruption. The data revealed that Julian had established a parallel network of shell real estate corporations based out of a neighboring county. Every single time a federal check cleared for Leo's fraudulent medication profile, the capital was systematically broken into smaller, untraceable increments and wired directly into these shell entities to purchase high-end commercial properties and fund a luxury casino investment portfolio that he managed alongside a senior board consultant named Victoria, the woman he had been quietly orchestrating an alternative lifestyle with behind my back. They believed that my profound grief over Lily's passing had left my mind completely incapacitated, a convenient psychological blind spot that would prevent me from ever verifying the unallocated sectors of our shared estate or checking the hospital's corporate ledger. Julian's private communication logs with Victoria rendered their absolute, cold-blooded calculations right on my screen. In one encrypted email string, Julian wrote, "Clara is completely sedated by her work at the clinic. She hasn't audited a single account since the funeral. Once the state funding for the pediatric ward completes its quarterly cycle, we will liquidate our shares in the Manhattan Center, file for an immediate dissolution of the marriage based on her emotional instability, and transfer the property assets to our offshore corporation. She will be left with the medical liabilities and nothing else." Victoria's response bubble read, "Perfect. Let the orphan's profile run for another 30 days. The auditors aren't checking the physical IV lines as long as the digital dashboard shows the drug is being administered. We are completely safe." My green-blue eyes narrowed into a razor-sharp, frozen focus as I captured the raw metadata of their interaction. They had calculated every single variable, except one, the absolute unyielding discipline of a mother who had just uncovered the corporate murder of her own child. I didn't cry, I didn't drop my glass, and I didn't seek emotional vindication through a useless domestic confrontation. I systematically downloaded every single line of the fraudulent billing records, the pharmacy inventory mismatches, the text logs with Victoria, and the specific digital signatures Julian had blocked Lily's experimental therapy lines. I packaged the entire configuration profile into a pristine 100-page forensic compliance brief and delivered it through an encrypted priority channel directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. I didn't request an immediate arrest. I requested a coordinated strategic delay. I wanted the federal prosecutors to issue their freeze warrants and subpoenas at the exact moment when Julian's social vanity and material pride were at their absolute peak, during the hospital's upcoming annual multi-million-dollar Winter Charity Gala. The annual Winter Charity Gala was the absolute crown jewel of the Manhattan Medical Center's social calendar, a high-stakes corporate gathering designed to secure millions of private investments from global venture capitalists and elite New York philanthropists. The main ballroom of the luxury Plaza Hotel was transformed into an opulent wonderland of crystal ice sculptures, brilliant designer chandeliers, and high-end media arrays. Over 500 high-net-worth individuals, medical board partners, and political representatives occupied the space, their diamond jewelry flashing under the tracking lights as classical string quartets performed smooth, elegant melodies across the floor. Julian stood near the center of the main presentation stage, looking the absolute picture of a successful, untouchable healthcare mogul. He was dressed in a pristine, custom-tailored designer tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly groomed, his smooth, calculated laugh echoing effortlessly as he clinked champagne flutes with the primary global investors. Victoria stood at his right hand, wearing a lavish, diamond-encrusted silver gown, her features arranged into a mask of arrogant triumph as they prepared to announce their new commercial expansion project, a project funded entirely by the black market capital siphoned from Leo's fraudulent medical profile. At precisely 9 p.m., Julian stepped up to the central mahogany podium, the house lights dimming as a massive, high-definition digital screen behind him illuminated to display the hospital's projected financial growth parameters. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice smooth, confident, and carrying an immense authority that commanded the absolute attention of the room. "Tonight, we celebrate not just our financial excellence, but our absolute commitment to pediatric care. Our innovative genetic therapy programs have stabilized the lives of our most vulnerable patients, providing a shining beacon of hope across this great city." Suddenly, before he could execute his next presentation slide, the main entrance doors of the ballroom were violently pushed open, and a contingent of 12 federal agents dressed in dark tactical compliance windbreakers stepped into the room, accompanied by the senior U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. The sudden intrusion caused the entire environment to fracture into absolute confusion within a fraction of a second. I stepped through the double doors directly behind the federal team. I wasn't wearing a standard white doctor's coat or a submissive, grief-stricken black mourning dress. I walked into the opulent ballroom wearing an exceptionally beautiful, gorgeous, striking crimson-red dress made of premium, heavy matte fabric with a clean, square neckline and a structured, elegant silhouette that caught the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers beautifully. It was a stunning, sophisticated dress designed for a high-end executive social setting, making me look radiant, effortlessly beautiful, and completely independent. My long chestnut brown hair fell in clean, flawless layers down my shoulders, and my piercing, icy blue eyes held a terrifying, razor-sharp clarity. But the most striking transformation was the expression on my face. My lips were turned upward into a powerful, quiet, slight smile of absolute victory, a confident, knowing look of supreme dominance that held no anger, no malice, and no remaining sorrow. It was the smile of an expert forensic auditor who had tracked the institutional anomaly, placed the final regulatory snare, and won every single piece of the board. I walked slowly down the central carpeted aisle, my crimson dress rustling softly against the velvet chairs, my blue eyes locked directly onto Julian's pale face as he stood frozen at the podium. "Clara, what is the meaning of this theatrical disruption?" Julian stammered into the live microphone, his smooth corporate voice cracking slightly as his eyes scanned my striking red dress and the federal badges approaching the stage. "You are completely out of line. Your emotional instability is reaching a public crisis. Security, please escort my wife out of the ballroom immediately." "The security lines have been permanently reassigned, Julian," I replied, my voice perfectly flat, carrying a cold, resonant stillness that cut through the sound system with the force of an execution warrant. The U.S. attorney stepped up to the podium, pulled out a certified federal seizure warrant, and directed his agents to secure Julian's personal electronic devices and corporate asset files right in front of the flashing cameras of the media details. "Julian Vance, by order of the Federal District Court, all active domestic and international banknotes, commercial property deeds, and corporate accounts associated with your name have been placed under an immediate, total freezing injunction," the attorney announced, his voice echoing off the walls with an absolute finality. "You are being charged with multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud, grand embezzlement of state funds, and intentional civil conspiracy." The subsequent courtroom proceedings did not resemble a standard drawn-out legal negotiation. It transformed into an immediate, absolute execution of justice that completely flattened Julian's financial and social footprint within 90 days. With the unvarnished data trail provided in my forensic brief, including the pharmacy inventory mismatches, the text logs detailing his plan to declare me incompetent, and the direct proof that he had blocked our daughter Lily's life-saving treatment, the defense team's corporate strategy was completely neutralized before the first trial cycle could even initialize. Victoria didn't waste a single hour on emotional devotion or supportive legal defenses. The exact millisecond she realized that the federal government was seizing every single dime of the real estate portfolios and that she was facing a mandatory 10-year corporate fraud sentence as a co-conspirator, she turned state evidence, delivering hours of recorded testimony against Julian in exchange for a minor sentence reduction. Julian was left entirely isolated, his high-priced defense lawyers terminating their contracts the moment his asset accounts were dropped to a permanent zero balance by the federal court. The family law judge, looking at the comprehensive evidence of Julian's malicious dissipation of community property and his horrific breach of fiduciary duty to our child, executed a historic, unappealable fault-based judgment. Under the strict parameters of New York regulatory codes concerning corporate fraud and marital asset concealment, the court ordered a total asset forfeiture. I was awarded conditional 100% ownership of our multi-million-dollar Upper East Side property, the remaining commercial investments, and a massive direct restitution package funded by the immediate liquidation of Julian's private equity shares in the medical center. He was left entirely penniless, his medical license permanently revoked, his name turned into an absolute toxic scandal across the global healthcare network. The true validation of my victory materialized 6 months later on a pristine, sun-drenched morning in the high-end medical sector of Manhattan. I had utilized my newly acquired corporate shares and liquidated asset reserves to execute a complete, systematic restructuring of the private medical center, transforming the corrupt pediatric ward into a state-of-the-art nonprofit clinical foundation named the Lily and Leo Sanctuary for Advanced Pediatric Recovery. I walked into the newly renovated, sunlit recovery wing, my steps light, confident, and carrying a deep sense of psychological peace. I was no longer a woman trapped inside the dark vacuum of unhealed grief. I approached bed 14, where young Leo was sitting upright, his cheeks holding a healthy, radiant color, his lungs completely healed after receiving 6 months of the true, unadulterated experimental genetic therapy that our foundation now provided completely free of charge to every orphaned child in the state system. He looked up at me as I approached his bedside, his eyes holding a bright, brilliant sparkle of absolute gratitude. "Dr. Clara?" Leo said, his young voice clear, strong, and full of life, as he reached out his hand to hold my arm. "The machine said that you fixed them. They said you made the bad people go away forever so I could get strong." I smiled down at him, my powerful victory smile transforming into an expression of deep maternal warmth as I adjusted his treatment charts with a clean, unhurried precision. "The system is perfectly balanced now, Leo. You are completely safe inside this perimeter." As I exited the ward corridor, my smartphone interface buzzed with an incoming encrypted notification from a state correctional facility outside the city limits. It was a formal, desperate letter processed by Julian's state-appointed public defender, operating from a stark, gray concrete cell block where Julian was currently serving a 15-year federal sentence with zero possibility of early parole allocation. "Clara," the text read, the syntax thin, ragged, and completely stripped of his former smooth, calculated corporate arrogance. "The board partners took everything I built downtown to cover the government penalties. I am wearing a state uniform, working a manual laundry line for 12 cents an hour, and my name has been erased from every real estate registry in New York. Victoria left for the West Coast after her compliance release cleared. You completely liquidated my entire existence. Was it really worth destroying a man's future just because of a temporary administrative dispute over the clinical charts? I stood near the grand glass windows of the riverfront pavilion, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan, my powerful smile of absolute victory deepening on my lips as I placed my fingers onto the screen to execute the final, closing entry of his ledger. "I didn't destroy your future, Julian," I typed back, my fingers moving with the flat, unhurried precision of a senior risk consultant processing a routine system report. I simply allowed the structural laws of human justice and federal compliance to output the exact reality of the data you chose to enter into that pediatric ward. You chose to sign a digital contract of your own betrayal while sacrificing the survival of our own daughter to protect your black market wealth footprint. Enjoy the final compilation of your choices. I hit send, deleted the messaging thread from my local server cache, and permanently blocked his tracking domain from my network architecture forever. He remains inside his self-built concrete cage, a penniless, isolated ghost trapped inside the vacuum of his own arrogance, his name just an erased entry in my future compliance logs. The past is a secured perimeter, the child is saved, and my path finally stands on its own unshakable, permanent foundation. Do you know why I am telling you this story from the censor of this beautiful, sunlit medical pavilion? Because the predators, corporate deceivers, and manipulators of this world want you to believe that if you are a regular, structured person who focuses on your data and trusts your family, you are too weak to defend your own life. They think that because you are quiet, because you ignore their small slights while isolating yourself to process your grief in a clinical ward, you must be blind to their large institutional conspiracies. They believe that a gaslighted broken heart will always collapse into useless tears and mental confusion. But they do not understand the absolute, unalterable laws of patience, documentation, and strategic leverage. Your life does not belong to the people who try to manipulate your sanity using a fraudulent corporate narrative. And you don't need a loud screaming match, a public scene, or a chaotic confrontation to execute absolute justice against a traitor. You just need the cold, silent discipline to collect the device logs, secure the digital footprints, and wait for the exact operational window to let their own arrogant greed pull the trigger on their existence. Julian thought he could steal my sanctuary, block my daughter's medication, and declare me mentally unstable because I was a quiet pediatrician behind a sterile station sheet. He forgot the most basic rule of the system backups. The woman who manages the files always knows exactly how to liquidate the assets. I am Dr. Clara. The audit is finalized, the asset is secured, and my path finally stands on its own unshakable foundation. Now, I have a final question for you, the elite group listening to my voice in the quiet of your own room tonight. If you discovered your husband was systematically falsifying an orphaned child's medical charts to siphon state funds while actively blocking your own daughter's life-saving treatment, would you lose your temper and weep over his corporate power? Or would you wait patiently for the annual multi-million-dollar charity gala to initiate a federal forensic raid and watch him get removed by investigators in front of his own global investors? Tell me your strategy in the comments below. I am analyzing your logic.